get out your pencils and paper. It's going to be a quiz at the end, okay? I'm assuming that most all of you were in the panel this morning, the discussion this morning, where we talked about, or I introduced the idea of consumerization and what it means in trusted computing. I'll say it. I'm really going to say, just to be truth in advertising, I'm going to say a few words about that concept, consumerization. And I'm going to illustrate some of the trusted computing group technologies that meet the criteria for consumerization. But then I'm going to move very quickly into my favorite subject, which is self-encrypting drives, as an example of consumerization of trusted computing. So this is largely a presentation on self-encryption, okay? Just to give you a warning. And as I turn my back, some of you can slip out on it. Good, nobody moved. As I say, as it indicates here, I'm with Samsung. Just to mention, Samsung was the first TCG member to develop a solid-state self-encrypting drive for the marketplace. And of course, we're up and running, still strong in that market. Let's see. Oh, that's that. Yeah. Now, okay, you try to read this from the back. This is one version of an abstract of this presentation. It's very long. The key points in this are the red parts. Don't try to even read that, because I've reduced the red parts down to the essence of the abstract is this: that if I keep hearing this term consumerization. If you look, the way you do what's hot in the industry is you count how many linear inches of publications, trade press publications, are devoted to a certain idea. If you remember the 10, whoever the fellow that wrote the book, the 10. Anyway, there's a book written about 10 phenomena happening, and the way he calculated the 10 most active phenomena in the industry was by counting linear inches of copy devoted to a subject. So if you look at the trade press that way, you'll see consumerization in many different forms and discussion contexts. And the idea is that consumerization of IT, what do I mean? What I mean is if I take a prototypical consumer, and what is that consumer? That's me and you. And when we're presented with a piece of a thing, maybe a piece of technology, a piece of software, or something that we have to, a car, something that we have to use in our daily lives. What are the consumer requirements for things, right, to a consumer, like the person on the street? And I would hold as things like ease of use, transparency, robustness of whatever the functionality is, inexpensive. I'd also like it to be, the plumbing, if you will, to be transparent, to be invisible to me. I don't want to deal with the plumbing. I want it to work. Right? I don't care how carburetors work. I want to know the car goes forward, right, when I push on the gas. So you get yourself in a consumer mindset. So what do I mean by consumerization of IT? What it means is think BYOB or BYOD, right? Bring your own device. We're already bringing our own body, I guess, but bring your own device to work means that the consumer mentality is being brought into the workplace with their equipment, right? I'm going to bring my own device. I'm used to it being easy to use, transparent capability, and so on. I want that same capability in the IT business environment. Well, now let's put another hat on. That's the IT hat. Let's put your other hat on called trusted computing. The tenets of trusted computing, going back to the early days of TCPA, which is the predecessor organization before there was a TCG, which is 10 years old itself. So TCPA was around 12, 13 years ago. The very early tenets of trusted computing were robust security, built-in hardware root of trust, transparency, integrated into the infrastructure, that is built in, not built on. And if you just look at these two lists, there's a very, very, what I would say, complementary list of functions. The consumer requirement on IT in the business, like BYOD and so on, is very complementary with the tenets of trusted computing. So therefore, I've kind of completed the triangle, if you will, the Venn diagram of overlapping spheres. And we can talk about the consumerization of trusted computing. And I see that as if nothing else, as a good marketing angle for trusted computing. Is it gives you that consumer level expectation in your technology, in security technology, that the consumer on the street expects. Right? Transparency, built in, not on, robust, inexpensive, no performance impact, those kinds of things. So that's my theme, is consumerization of trusted computing. Now, a little, if you haven't seen it already, just a brief tutorial on the trusted computing itself. A trusted computing group that's 10 years old. It works under the guise of work groups, if you're not familiar with this. We have a storage work group. That's the other button. We have a storage work group. We have a mobile phone work group. We have various other work groups. And those are the ones that develop the technical specifications for trusted computing in that context. So the storage group, for example, has given you the concept of self-encrypting drive that I'll talk about later. But other groups have given you other technologies. The TCG does the specification, and then the implementers build the product. So there's no product built by TCG, only standards and specifications. And in fact, we're moving the standards selectively into the international community. The TPM spec already has, for example, TPM 1.0 has already moved into the ISO arena and is now a publicly available specification, a PAS, under ISO standards. Now, how do standards benefit security? Well, how do standards benefit anyone or any technology? It makes it reduces cost. Maybe this might be the part that's here on time. Let me see. So it reduces cost because you have lots of competitors building to the same standard, price competitive, that sort of thing. Cuts deployment time because we have a very nicely defined specification that's been vetted in the industry. We're building to it. All the industry collectively is building to it. So I reduce development time. And it enables multi-vendor interoperability. The very purpose of standards is to get some interoperability among vendors building to the same standard. And then you get broad adoption because the world looks to standards anymore, not proprietary solutions. If you don't know it already, you're probably packing a piece of TCG technology already somewhere on your person or somewhere in your technology suite. Right? The TPM has been built on untold bazillions of planers, of motherboards and laptops and other computers all around the world for a number of years now, being selectively exploited. The drives, if you just look at these, are just a sampling of some of the products that implement TCG technologies. But the nice thing is they're invisible to a large extent, transparent, they don't impact the overhead performance and so on. So the irony is that you don't know they're there necessarily, even though you may be using them in a critical way. In fact, I mentioned this morning, that's one of the challenges of marketing TCG technology to somebody, is you're talking about an invisible technology to a person that you want to have them appreciate that technology and buy it. So it creates an interesting dichotomy. You've seen these charts before, but if you count TPMs and other SEDs and other trusted computing technologies, there's upwards of 1 billion units distributed in the world this year and growing. So it's growing along a nice exponential path of growth here. So we're permeating. That was one of the first objectives early on of TCG, was to permeate the industry with this technology. And then I just want to look at a few of the technologies very briefly. This won't be a tutorial on any of these. There are other presentations that cover these in more detail. But first out of the chute, longest running TCG technology, basically for authentication and validation and assurance, is the Trusted Platform Module. It's a little enclave, a little chip that sits on the motherboard. And in the old days, Wave used to call something like this the embassy chip. And you think of embassy like an embassy in a foreign land. An embassy is until recently, presumably secure enclave in an otherwise foreign environment. So that's what the TPM is. It's a secure enclave of trust sitting in an otherwise foreign environment, like a platform, like a motherboard with an operating system, which is a very hostile environment, if you will. So the TPM does such things as it can hash, it can encrypt, It doesn't do block encryption. It's not that fast because it's very inexpensive. It's very invisible. Applications can use it and you not even be aware of it, certainly. It's in hardware. There's no performance impact on what's going on. One of its main claims to fame is that it's for assurance. I can basically take a fingerprint of a piece of software that's stored on the TPM in the registers. Later, I can take another snapshot or fingerprint of software, and the TPM will compare the two, and if there's anything askew, then it alerts you to the fact that something, possibly a virus or something, changed that software. So you can have assurance, assuring various elements of software using the TPM. TPM here, it's just sort of the basic operation is, I mentioned you hash a value, it can be stored in the TPM of a system image of some kind. Later I can recheck that image. That's what the top piece is showing me here. If it still checks, it's the same fingerprint as before, then the system is unlocked and operated, right? The credentials are presented to unlock the system, like an OS. If not, if the TPM notes that the hashing values collide, don't match, then it can raise an alert that says something wrong with that operating system or that piece of application software. So that's the basic operation of the TPM. There's just for the real technology folks out there, there's a cheap, boxing but cute TPM. And there's the functionality, which is pretty powerful stuff. Just short of block encryption, there's no high-speed encryption, volume encryption, but all the functionality in a TPM. A pretty hefty function to be able to exploit in that enclave of trust in an otherwise foreign environment. Network access control is the generic term in the industry, NAC, network access control. And the basic idea is that clients join a network and you don't know if they're properly configured or profiled or if they're allowed to join the network. So they can be examined, if you will, by this technology, by the NAC technology, and either allowed on the network or quarantined off the network until they're repaired, if you will. So the three basic components of the NAC architecture, which Trusted Computing Group calls TNC, Trusted Network Connect. In fact, Trusted Network Connect has won the standards battle, right? I mean, there's Microsoft and a few others that had other technologies in this area. And through IEEE and other standards, TNC is kind of the standard now for NAC in the industry through IEEE and other standards. The basic idea is that I have somebody that's requesting access to the network, right? Somebody requesting or some device of some kind. I've got 2 points: a policy enforcement point in the network that's transparent to the user, but there embedded in the network. That is going to be the policeman, if you will, that allows or disallows access to the network. And then there's a policy decision point back here where the policy that applies to that entity is applied and either kept away from the network or not. Now, let me extend that just a little bit on the back end. There are 2 other components in Trusted Network Connect architecture: metadata access point and various flow control sensors and so on. So let me just give a little dynamic. I think that TNC folks gave me this. Let's see if this works. If you'll just follow the... I'm sorry. First is the health check example. Here's the health check of an element joining the network. First, the policy decision point has the policy embedded that applies to network devices. One system was found to be compliant and allowed to join the network. So the production network is allowed through the policy enforcement point. Another system did not, as you can see, did not match this system here did not match it's hard to read, but the policy statements at the policy decision point, and by virtue of that, that point of requesting access is quarantined, if you will, to a remediation network where they need to be repaired. So that's the basic operation. Here's another behavioral check that's capable in TNC. That is, I can be joined to the network, but I can exhibit bad behavior. And if you exhibit bad behavior, you can be blocked off the network also. And so the policy exists at the policy decision point. The fellow joins the production network, but does some devilish little thing that is picked up by one of the sensor and flow control devices, does something wrong, like sending prohibited email communication off network or something, whatever is being sensed for. And then that alert then is sent back to the policy enforcement point, where that entity is then joined and taken off the production network and put on the remediation network. This is, don't memorize this. This is the full architecture flows, right? Because what is this architecture about? It's what are the communications between these various entities. So these are the specs, if you will, behind TNC. And that's what the developers then would build to this specification. In fact, we have some very good demonstrations in the exhibit hall for TNC implementation, Juniper and other companies that have already built this network access control. One thing that wasn't mentioned explicitly this morning, but one of the versions of TPM, our most recent version, is TPM-mobile. I think of the old language for that was Mobile Trusted Platform. The mobile work group, the phone people, have developed a TPM-like device. In the naming, in the nomenclature, we're calling those various forms of TPMs. So there's TPM-mobile. And so the mobile folks, in fact, the Nokia fellow can show you his phone that now has implemented in it the TPM-mobile in the phone, with the latest phones. Cloud security. Now, let me just jump into my favorite example of consumerization of trusted computing, self-encrypting drives. The idea is very simple. And let's take a historical perspective on it. In the old days of IT, and there's a few of us that were around during the old days of IT, you always talked about end-to-end security. Well, what did end-to-end security mean? It meant from the computer at this end to the computer at the other end and everything in between, protected. What we forgot, and we are now retrofitting to, was there's about that much more to the end of the end. That is, there's a storage device off of the platform, off of the computer. There's a storage device there. There's a storage device at the other end. Because most data spends its useful life, a few milliseconds on the network, and days upon end in storage. So most data spends its useful life in storage. The average speed of my car is 0 because it sits in the parking lot all the time and travels the road a little bit. So the end-to-end, really, we've just realized that there's a lot of intelligence and a lot of vulnerability in storage. So end-to-end now should include storage. And the idea is that most stored data, a mantra, all stored data rather, should be encrypted. This should live in encrypted form because it just, that short circuits so many vulnerabilities that stored data, all of its life, may have. Just encrypt it, strong encryption, strong controls, strong key management controls, and be done with it. You have stored data protected. That's what self-encrypting drive does. Is in the hardware of the drive itself, right? Hardware root of trust. I implement encryption in hardware. Everything written to the drive is encrypted. Everything read is decrypted. And so I never see the encryption. It's transparent. The only time the encryption photons exist is on the media itself. Right? As soon as I read from the drive, it's decrypted, and what I see is plain. So when I'm playing with one of these drives, it's always write in the clear, write in the clear. I don't see the encryption. It only lives, it's not in communication. It only lives on the drive. Keep that in mind. So let's go into that example a little further. The problem, we always have to have a problem to solve here, not just for the fun of technology, is that we're generating these exabytes of data that were referenced this morning, and we're processing that data and we're throwing it all around the place in mobility space, and a lot of it is sensitive or confidential. So whole countries now, not just companies, but whole countries have got concerned about their citizenry being exposed by having data lost, breached is the formal term, by having sensitive data about their citizenry breached somehow. Lost, potentially open to the evil world at large, right? So breach notification laws have been promulgated not only in the states, but in the federal government. Now the EU Commission, for example, is requiring all the EC companies to develop a breach notification law in each of the member companies. And so that's the problem you're dealing with, is breach notification. And if I have to, what does breach notification say? It says if you lose something, personal or confidential, on your personnel, your employees, or your customers, then you've got to notify the public that you lost that data. You have to, in a sense, publicly humiliate yourself to tell the world, I lost some important information. That's the nature, that's me. So that, you can imagine that has tremendous legal, financial, and even reputational. We've seen some companies fold because they lost their customer base, because they lost their trust in their systems. So what you find, however, when you look at these breach notification laws, and this is just an extract I took from the first such law, the California law, that says, and there's more expansion on this, but it basically gives what's called an encryption safe harbor. It says later in the law, it says if you can audibly prove you encrypted the data before it was lost, then it wasn't really lost, right? That's sort of a theological question. If you have encrypted data, is it lost when it's displaced, or in either event? Most of them have an encryption safe harbor that say you don't have to breach notify if you can prove it was encrypted. Simple statement. And this is a compliance statement, right? I know I've got to encrypt data because it's vulnerable, it's sensitive. The breach notification law say I've got to tell the world if I lose it. Hey, here's a simple way to encrypt it. Here's a simple way to avoid that requirement of breach notification. I simply prove I've got it encrypted, and I'm safe from having to notify. How do you prove it? That's what Stephen talked about this morning. Is I want to have associated. And we'll get into that in a second, but I want to have associated software products, management products, that can keep, audit trails of encryption being exploited so that I can show that, in fact, I didn't just pay $29.95 for an encryption product. The sales receipt won't do it. It's that I actually have an audit trail, a trustworthy audit trail that shows the encryption was enforced when I lost the data. So it's through that mechanism that we prove that it was encrypted. So again, why encrypt data? Well, there's lots of exception reasons to encrypt data. You worry about losing it or having it stolen. But by the way, there are normal business processes that cause you to temporarily lose control of data. And the scenario we're dealing with here is loss of control by the owner of the data. Well, that happens when it's lost or stolen. But it also happens if I send a drive out for warranty repair. Right? Out of the data center, I send a drive out. I end up life a drive and give it to somebody else. So there are lots of business normal processes that cause me to lose control of data. And that's the scenario that we're dealing with, is loss of control by the owner. Now, there are lots of places where I can do encryption. And one view is this. The only reason we didn't start out doing encryption in the right place, which is in the drive itself, because that's the end of end-to-end, is because we didn't realize that storage devices are sentient devices. We didn't realize that they have powerful computers, processors inside. They have lots of memory, obviously, right, to deal with. They have closed, dark, dank, secure environment, right? The interfacing to a drive is much more controlled than the interfacing to an operating system. Right? So just historically, it's more controlled and it's more hardware based. But yet, historically, we have encrypted data in storage at a number of places, from the host middleware down through the host HBA, the host-based adapter. Applications do encryption. The switch in the networking fabric does encryption. So there's over the years, there has evolved this layered approach to doing encryption at various points, bumping the wire. There's a lot of encryption done in some array controllers. And then finally, the newest one is do encryption in the drive itself, as specified by TCG. Layered approach. I mentioned this in passing. The Storage Networking Industry Association has developed and revised, by the way, a checklist of how to roll out encryption for data at rest. And it's a 9-step program to roll out encryption. I'm not going to dwell on it. You can see that. But if you mirror those 9 steps, where you're looking at what kind of data you've got, where the data goes, where the data flows, and where it's kept, and you try to optimize the flow so you don't have to do encryption all over the place. It turns out if you adopt self-encrypting drives, you greatly simplify those steps in the encryption process, in selecting the encryption process. Understanding the drivers. The driver here is breach notification law. I don't have to classify and inventory my data assets because all stored data will be encrypted because every drive will be an encrypting drive. Before you had to inventory because you only had one encryption processor and you didn't want to overtax it, right? So I could only encrypt selected data, the important stuff, and therefore I had to classify data for that reason. Now with self-encryption, I don't need to classify or inventory my data assets anyway, which would get immediately out of sync, right? I don't worry about where the data flows because wherever it flows to a drive for storage, it gets encrypted and so on. The 9-step process from SNIA is in fact greatly simplified. The other thing to keep in mind when you look at point of encryption or encrypting stored data is, okay, suppose you encrypt upstream from the storage, right? There's that point upstream, if you will, right? Let's suppose upstream, there's the point. Everything below this point is encrypted data. It's ciphertext. And in Crypto 101, you know that ciphertext looks just like random data. It looks like a random flow. And what? You can't compress a random data stream. It's already compressed. You can't look for any semantics in the encrypted stream because it's encrypted. It's garbage. It's gibberish, right? You can't look for patterns. So you can't do data loss prevention. You can't do compression because it's already as compressed as it can be. So all of these procedures, data compression, data deduplication, I can't find two pieces of data that are the same because encrypting doesn't work that way. Two pieces of data could be encrypted entirely differently. So all of this, the thing to keep in mind then is that all of these processes that you may be using end-to-end stop at the point of encryption. The nice thing is, if I put that point of encryption in the storage device, they all operate. They can, these higher layer functions all continue to operate without interruption. I mentioned the storage trusted computing group profile. The storage work group has published a series of specifications, and that's where all of us drive guys are building to. And this just summarizes, I think, I probably alluded to most of these, but it summarizes the advantages of doing self-encryption, the superiority of self-encryption versus other upstream encryption processes, even in hardware, and certainly against any software solution. The management is simplified. Why? Because the key to the encryption is generated in the factory on board the drive and never externalized. So you don't do encryption key management. There's an authentication key that is externalized that's used for locking and unlocking the drive, but you don't manage the encryption key. Simplified key management. Robust security is built in hardware. We all have faith that a good design in hardware is better than a good design in software. Compliant safe harbor, I've already talked about. Cut disposal costs. The NIST has just now standardized, or soon to publish, the revision 1 of SP 800-88, special publication, that talks about how to sanitize media. And they've now recognized crypto erase. If that key never leaves the drive, it's generated in the factory randomly, it's a very controlled environment for the key. If I just ask the drive to delete and replace the key with a new random key, then the old data is gone. That's, again, a theological question there. Is it really gone? It's encrypted, and you don't have the key. That's considered sanitized. So crypto erase, which happens instantaneously, can be used to sanitize the drive, and you didn't destroy your media. You didn't put it in a grinder. You didn't degauss it, which destroys drives. You didn't subject it to these expensive, error-prone processes. Scalable. Every drive has one. I put 1,000 drives out there, and I've got 1,000 encrypting engines operating independently. Interoperable because of the interface defined by the TCG standard. Integrated into the drive electronics. It's part of the controller chip now, the encryption is. And then transparent. It comes from the drive, from the factory encrypting. The user need not even know that it's an encrypting drive. Because all they see is plain in, plain out. The encryption only lives on the drive medium. And Eric Willett, what a funny way to spell Willett with no W's. But Eric Willett at Gardner rolled it up into one word, which you never, ever hear in security circles. Simplicity. So he described the self-encrypting drive approach as simplicity. Have you ever heard that in security? Simplicity. I have. Now, here's a little bit of what goes on inside the drive. Take a little drop down. When I turn on the laptop in the morning, I have a self-encrypted drive. There's a pre-boot image already loaded on the drive that's been authenticated. That before the OS is loaded, well, the first thing you do, the first thing the BIOS does whenever you turn on your computer, you may or may not know this, is request an LBA range. Right? The master boot record is requested to be loaded, which usually contains the operating system. Well, before that NBA request is satisfied, the drive, that is the encrypting drive, has this logic in it, redirects that command to a pre-boot image on the drive, and it loads instead a pre-boot image to the user that says, give me your authentication credential. So the user, through either manual or automated or many other Active Directory or other processes that can be integrated in, the user presents the authentication credentials to the drive. The drive itself checks the authentication credentials, and if they pass muster, then the drive is unlocked, and the master boot record is then loaded, the OS comes in, and then the drive and the machine become operational. So this pre-boot authentication process happens very early in the cycle, and it's managed by the drive, electronics, and hardware and firmware itself. Now, a little bit more about what's going on the drive down here. So here's not all media is round, of course. This is just early BIOS, rotating media, and of course there are solid-state drives that are square, right? But just imagine on a day-to-day basis with a self-encrypting drive, what's on that drive? When I go home at night, what's left on the drive? Well, it turns out what's left on the drive is not the authentication key. But just like any good password, you never store the password. You only store the hashed value of the password. And so the authentication key, which the user manages externally, but keep in mind the encrypting key is not managed externally, but maintained internally only. So the only thing on the media is the hash value of the authentication key, the encrypted value, this is important, of the encrypting key. That is, when I configure these drives with an authentication key, the first thing the drive does is takes the factory-made encrypting key, uses the authentication key to encrypt it, and from then on, the drive never stores even the encrypting key during its quiescent time. Instead, it stores little green. Instead, it stores the encrypted value only. And then, of course, the only thing down here in terms of user data is all the user data is encrypted. Everything ever written to the drive was encrypted yesterday or the day that it was written. So if you look at that, Crypto 101 says, from these ingredients, the Crypto 101 class, if everything there is strong hash, strong encrypting algorithm, and so on, I cannot recover the encrypting key from that information. I can't reverse the hash to get the authentication key to unlock the encrypting key and therefore apply it to the encrypted data. So Crypto 101 says it's very secure. What happens when I turn the laptop on in the morning? Up here in the morning, the pre-boot image I described is presented to the user. I present the authentication key. The drive hashes that presented authentication key that's presented by the user. If it doesn't check with the hash value that's stored, then it rejects that and stays locked. It rejects the request to open that drive. If it does check with the hash value, it then uses that authentication key that was presented by the user, because it doesn't even have a copy of the authentication key itself. Only the user has that. It's like a split key situation. The encrypting key stays on the drive. The authentication key stays with the user. Sort of a split key thing, right? It takes getting them both together to get the encrypting key. So the little green one. So the authentication key is used to decrypt the encrypting key. That's loaded into the ASIC, the volatile memory that does the AES algorithm. And then the drive is off and running, encrypting, decrypting everything that's read and written to the drive. When I shut down again at night, the only thing left on the drive is this information. And the authentication key is up there with the user. In some automated system, in the case of the SCSI drives, or in some other automated system with respect to SATA, or it's in the Active Directory, wherever the user decides to keep those authentication keys. So there's a little more about the operation of a self-encrypting drive. I mentioned the crypto erase function that's now in the revision 1 of the sanitization standard from NIST, SB 800-88. Crypto erase just says that I can request a new, the drive is up and running encrypting all the time with the factory generated on drive encrypting key. But I can ask the drive anytime through executive command, an authenticated command, change the encrypting key. What the drive does is generates randomly a new encrypting key and deletes and overwrites the old encrypting key. Right? And so if I tried to use that new key on the old data, it would just be gibberish. Right? It couldn't decrypt it because it's the wrong key. So what I can do is just reformat that drive and use it as a brand new piece of equipment. Right? I didn't destroy my inventory, but I instantaneously sanitized the drive. I can throw it away, sell it on eBay, do whatever I want now because it's protected behind this veil of cryptography. Performance degradation, I just mentioned. You don't have to worry about some coprocessor in the cloud that's going to get taxed too busy because you want everything to be encrypted in that one coprocessor. You don't have to do that because every drive that you add to the system, whether you add it in a RAID system or you add another laptop to the system, every drive has an encrypting engine in it, independently operating at full drive speed encrypting engine. So there's no taxing their performance and no degradation, adding untold thousands of drives to your environment. All the data is being encrypted, no performance degradation. I mentioned that there are exception conditions that cause you to lose control of data, like lost or stolen. But there are business processes that we worry about more in the way of end of life or return for expired lease, that sort of thing. So there are lots of reasons through business processes, to lose control of the stored data. Well, the old days, in fact, for a lot of you, the current days, you didn't know about crypto erase and those techniques because we just, kind of retrofitting that to the world. So we use these less than optimal techniques. I mean, degaussing and destroying drives and overwriting. Well, many times people prove the overwriting thing doesn't really work. So, but that's all we had. That's all we had. So we used all these different processes. Here's the one Bob likes the most. I don't know if you've seen the drive Bob has a 45 bullets for the drive. He loves that one. But even the guys that do this for a living, Iron Mountain, we deal with so much data, sometimes we lose a little of it. Right? A quote from Iron Mountain itself. So these processes, the old processes that we've had because we didn't have any better way until now, are expensive, time-consuming, and very error-prone. Inventorying drives, putting them in bins, putting them up, inventory, waiting till the off-site people come and do something, and then I lose my inventory. Whereas if you had used self-encrypting drives, the minute you lock that drive, right, the minute you turn the drive off, it's locked. Everything on the drive is encrypted. There's nothing on the drive that I could use to recreate the encrypting key. The data is the drive is sanitized. I can send it off-site right away. There's no issue with distributing that drive for warranty, repair, and so on. As an extra measure, though, of security, little insurance, you want to really feel doubly safe. You don't need the data that's on that one copy, that one drive anymore anyway, because you got backup over here. Apply crypto erase to the drive. Gives you kind of a double, you not only got it locked, and nobody can unlock it until they get the authentication key. Now I do crypto erase. I don't care if you unlock it or what, right? They can't get to the data. So very inexpensive and very quick way of doing drive sanitation. Key management. If you just look at all the bouncing balls here, there's a little song going on here called key management now. If I use upstream encryption, right, some layered encryption, I have keys all over the place. I may have a key for application encryption, keys done in the network. I may have data that's encrypted under one key that's distributed on multiple drives. Right? So what happens if one fails, and what do I do to recover? Whereas if I use the encryption, self-encrypting drives, the encryption happens for stored data, not for transmitted data, but stored data in the drive itself, I've got a much simpler key management problem. I don't manage the encryption key. All I manage in a systematic way are the authentication keys for unlocking the drives. Much simpler picture. This is just a number of, there's a number of papers written on this, by the way, that are available, comparing hardware-based encryption and software-based encryption. But these are just some of the points where, in fact, in all points, hardware-based self-encryption wins out. But it's things I've referred to already. Transparency, right, comes from the factory encrypting. Your user doesn't even have to know it. Ease of management, no encrypting key to manage. Lifecycle cost, if you add it all up, in fact, some companies like IDC have actually added up the lifecycle cost, and there's a big cost difference, not just initial price, of which there's zero initial price. I mean, most of the self-encrypting drive companies have gone to a no markup, right, in this generation of drives, no markup for the self-encrypting function. So lifecycle costs show a big difference in manageability and so on, software versus hardware. Disposal, I mentioned crypto erase. There's no re-encryption with a self-encrypting drive. I can change the authentication key every day if I want, because that's an externally managed key. But every time I change the authentication key, what does the drive do? It simply rehashes the old authentication key and re-encrypts the encryption key with that authentication key, but it doesn't change the encryption key. So the encrypted data doesn't have to be re-encrypted. So the encryption layer, that one half of the key can change. As long as I keep the encrypting key the same, I don't have to re-encrypt. Performance, I mentioned. Performance, I mentioned, every drive has one. Standardization through TCG. And then that issue, very important to some of you, the no interference with upstream processes like DLP and compression and so on. The only issue is you've got to buy some new stuff. But we're 6 years into selling SEDs, the hardware drive, the rotating media drives first, and now new in the market are the solid state drives. What we're finding, big customers are finding, they can roll out self-encrypting drive hardware in their normal replacement cycles. Pick the the boss and the people that are the road warriors get it first. Our laptops turn over every 3 years to 5 years. So they've all found that there's an orderly way to integrate self-encryption into their hardware base. And there are a number of deployment services now where you can buy the drives and retrofit the drive to your drive to the laptop and be very cost effective. You've got an inventory of laptops not going away anytime soon, and you just put new drives in them that are self-encrypted. Performance, there are two papers I just want to reference here very briefly. There are two papers on this independent study group called Trust and Strategies Group. They looked at rotating media drives, hard drives, hardware versus software, and they looked at solid state drives, hardware versus software, encryption. And they looked at a standard set of 6 loads, performance loads that are kind of standard in the industry for storage. And you can just look at the tables. The first 3 columns deal with hard drives. The second 3 deal with solid state drives. And they're comparing no encryption versus software encryption versus self-encrypting drives. And I'm just showing you some of the dramatic differences. Here is for hard drives, right? Much faster using SED than software. Over here, with solid state drives, much faster using self-encryption than software. But even more dramatic is this change between a hard drive and a solid-state drive. That just shows up the inherent performance superiority of a solid-state drive itself. Now, this is sort of a summary then, if you will. This is everything I had said and meant to say, all rolled into one. This is the future as we see it. Encryption everywhere. All stored data, repeat this mantra, all stored data should be encrypted, especially business data. Right? In whatever world you live in, it should be encrypted. Standards-based, unified and simplified key management. I've really hammered home on that. Transparency, it comes from the factory encrypting, no performance impact, the automatic performance scaling. So there's the future, because we're rolling out encrypting drives in RAID controllers, SCSI-based, SATA-based, and laptops and desktops. So they're all over the place. The specs apply across the spectrum. And I just reemphasize the point here that wherever you do encryption, if you're in a migration stage or you have layered encryption, but you like to move to solid-state drives, you need to bear in mind that below that point of encryption, you have less data context awareness. The lower you can move that point, the lower you can have. You don't have transmitted ciphertext, which is bad, and so on. So there's just the advantages of moving that point as low in the hierarchy as you can. My apologies for running over a bit here, but thank you. And I think we have a microsecond or two for questions. Actually, if this didn't stop, we've got a lot of time for questions.
So you started out as a consumerization, right?
And cheap and quickly degenerated.
Well, when I think of consumerization, I think of people bringing phones to the calculator work. And I don't see consumers rushing out to buy something rather than the person.
Well, let's look at consumerization as it evolves. I should have made this point. It's not that I can just walk in and do anything as a consumer. The IT groups that are going to accept consumerized consumer products are going to put mandates on those consumer products, right? So there's going to be this feedback. I mean, a lot of companies have said, no, you can't bring your own stuff. But we know that's going to be inevitable. I mean, we've already, I'm the last generation, but the younger generations, it's just, their devices are their devices. They're synonymous with me. This is me, and this is what I'm going to use at work. So to complete, there's a loop where the industry will specify to the consumer that these certain profiles have to be in place, certain minimum standards. But they'll draw from the mindset of a consumer. So I should have made that's a good point. I can't expect people just to go out and buy a self-encrypting drive. Well, I guess I could, but practically speaking, I don't expect you to do that, even though you should.
Well, they should originate in the device themselves. If they don't originate.
Yeah, then you're right. It's just a packaging question, right? If I'm buying a laptop, now that there's no price differential, every drive in a laptop should be an encrypted drive. If stored data should be encrypted, no price differential. It's easier for us to build a drive that is all encrypting. I don't have too many SKUs, right? I don't have multiple products. So at that level of maturity, every drive should be encrypted. So the consumer doesn't know. The consumer doesn't know, but the IT shop knows. That's a check mark for the IT shop that's accepting BYOD in their environment. Yeah, I should make that point. There needs to be a requirement from the IT shop out during this transition period.
And then the other thing is, it's only safe from its data perhaps when consumers want to bring their devices into the IT or whatever, they want to use the devices, they're not supposed to have it on that. So there's still a risk.
Yeah, so there's stored data, then there's transmitted data. And transmitted data, we all know, is the most universal solution there is SSL or TLS, right? And so there's negotiated key. Those keys, by the way, are very terrible. They're called temporal or ephemeral keys, right? For the life of the communication, when you transfer a piece of data from a server to your client, to your laptop, and it's using SSL or TLS. There's only a key generated for the life of that communication, which could be milliseconds. So those keys are ephemeral keys managed by the endpoints. And then they go away. Because once I stop talking to my server, I don't need that key. Right? So I've got two what are called key domains. They shouldn't be managed under the same key management system. Storage keys are long-term keys. Self-encrypting drives can keep that same key for the life of the drive until you purposely crypto erase for whatever reason. Communication keys are very short-lived, and you don't want them to lay around, right? Just for the life of the communication. So there are different key domains, and we naively assume that communications is solved because there's SSL or TLS. In practical terms, it's not solved because people don't build it correctly. But that's a secondary problem. So I'm assuming when I talk this way that communication, security, encryption is solved. But encryption of stored data, this is the best solution. Other questions?
I've got a question on TPMs. There was a slide that you showed which had TPM volumes for semiconductors. TPM was a part of it. I don't know if you have details on TPM volume.
Oh, the volume? Yeah, actually, that's discussed a little more in there's some papers on the TCG website. Because I actually stole that. And it is broken down into three components. that billion, they're not just TPMs necessarily, but the billion trusted computing components that are in the field this year, by this year. There's three components to that. But that's more discussed if you look at the open literature in the TCG website.
Okay. And will I also find details about there was a comment which said TPMs are about half the price of smart cards.
Now, under TCG, we stay away from pricing what.
I'm just wondering where that comment came from. What's the data behind that?
For the TPM, I didn't.
But there was a comment on the slide which said TPM is half the cost of the smart card device and 1/3 the cost of a token or something like that. It wasn't like.
Oh, I didn't realize that detail was even there. I'm sure that's quoted.
Yes.
It's not something I talked to, but I'm sure that's a TCG paper. It's quoted out of some industry reference.
That was Pricewaterhouse and Cooper's experiences are involved.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So Pricewaterhouse survey. And that's obviously immediately outdated, right? When you publish numbers like that. I'm sure it's nothing but improved, right? Other questions? Well, I appreciate it. Just another plug. If you want to continue discussions, I'll be in and out of the Samsung, the Trusted Computing Group. Samsung has a pod where we can talk about self-encrypting drives of the solid state variety. I can proudly show you my 1 terabyte solid state drive. I hold on to it with 2 hands now because it's disappeared several times in the last day or so. But real nice solid state of self-encryption with an open drive. Thanks again.